Well, greetings, everybody. Welcome once again to the Rec Poker Podcast. As you know, our official sponsor, as always, is Running Aces Racetrack Casino and Hotel, and we are also sponsored by Learn Pro Poker and website AMP. And in this chats edition of the podcast, we're going to hang out with Jack Laskey and Zach Resnick, who you might know from the Just Hands podcast, among some other things. But before we jump into that, we're going to introduce the panel. My name is Steve Fredland. I am at Rec Poker Steve in our Poker Stars home game, reminding you, as James Altucher said, poker is a skill game, pretending to be a chance game.
And I'm Chris Jones. I'm 5x5 on Twitter and on the Poker Stars home game, and I don't trust anyone who doesn't have a favorite hand.
I'm Jim Reed. I'm Bluffsterini in the home game, and I'm just telling you that if you want to get better at poker, you got to do it by talking to other people about your game.
John, let's go to Rob.
Oh, I was
there
still.
You go. Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
John is after Jim. I know it's pretty far apart in the alphabet.
No, it was the mute problem again. Anyway, so I'm John Somsky, Poker Geek MN everywhere, and I don't trust anyone who thinks that a particular hand should be their favorite.
I'm Rob Washam. I'm Radman50 on the Poker Stars home game and on Twitter. And by personal experience, in the $6 online tournaments, they always have it.
Very nice. Well, just a couple quick things, guys. Make sure that you check out Rec.Poker. You guys know this. We're more than a podcast. We're more than a membership site. We're a community. So if sort of discussing hands and celebrating wins and all that stuff in the context of an encouraging community is sort of up your alley, we would welcome you to be part of our community. And also, we have a new way. If you're saying, how can we support you guys? We've got an Amazon affiliate account now. So you go to our other resources tab, click on our Amazon link and bookmark that. And then every time you go on Amazon.com, we get a piece of that piece, and that helps us out quite a bit. So we would love it if you would support us in that way. So with that, let's bring them in, Zach and Jack. As I mentioned, the Just Hands podcast, some other things going on. Now, guys, some of Rec Poker Nation just knows you guys super well. Some of the folks that were out there with us, they don't really know, who are these guys? So let's start off by getting to know you a little bit. Jack, who the heck are you?
Hey,
I'm a professional podcaster. That's very professional introduction, I think.
Well, we know I'm someone.
Yes, we know you exist. I see you in 2 dimensions.
All right, so we've established that.
Yes.
Many of you guys will know me from this podcast from Just Hands Poker, which I started with my co-guest here, Zach Resnick. Zach and I actually started the podcast when we were in college together at Oberlin College Conservatory, our last year there. And we kind of started the podcast really as a way to just sort of bring accountability to our improvement as poker players. And we found that a lot of people liked what we had to say. And there have been people liking what we had to say for the last, 4 years now, or 4 or 5 years. Zach, unfortunately, had to leave us about 2 years ago on to bigger and better things. I was lucky enough to have him take me with him. But, for the last year and a half or so, we have a different co-host, James Bilderbeck, who is not going to be on today's pod, but I would still highly recommend, even though you won't hear the luscious tones of Zach's voice, you can still get some great poker strategy at Just Hands Poker. That's some stuff about me. There's more, but we'll probably get into it later. So I'll turn it over to Zach.
All right, Zach.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of fill in some of those blanks there. But Jack and I met while we were studying together at school. The main way we first interacted was not by playing cards, but actually playing jazz together. We had a couple ensembles, jamming a lot, but we started to become really close when we started studying poker together. And that has started a really beautiful, friendship and working relationship together. And kind of since then, he's been a partner and kind of close confidant for all the different, ventures that I have started, including, Just Hands Poker. But as Jack mentioned, then kind of moved on to stuff in the travel industry, had a couple of failed businesses, and now then started Easy Point, which Jack actually helped out with a little bit along the way. And Then we started a fund and brought Jack into that pretty early. And that's what Jack and I spend most of our time on today. And, the thing that I feel like I found that I want to be doing for decades and decades to come that wouldn't be there without poker. So here we are today, and thanks for having me.
Love it, man. We're super excited to chat with you guys. I'd love to get a little bit of background on your poker history. So, Zach, how did you start playing? Is it something you've always done, or was there a moment where you're like, oh, this seems like a fun thing to do?
I don't remember exactly when I kind of went, all in, so to speak. The first time I played was either at like a camp or with family. But I know the first when I started to, get more into it was definitely at camp when I was like 11 or 12, and kids started to play for money. And then, I've always loved strategy games. I've always been really competitive, and I've always been pretty good at those games. So I got to stay up playing with my friends and taking their money most nights. So that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed kind of all aspects of that. I then graduated to online poker and, turned some Visa gift cards into a lot more money when I, perhaps was not of the recommended legal age. And
recommended legal age. Like
that's the technical
sort
legal
of an oxymoron.
term, just for all the lawyers listening,
Right.
Then I had a good lesson in counterparty risk, which has come to serve us later and served a lot of pain at the age of, it was either 15 or 16, when kind of all of it went poof. But yeah, I always enjoyed it. But that's when I started to really study, before I played a lot and I thought about it, but I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was fucking 12 years old, But then, once I started playing online, reading kind of sit and go strategy on Full Tilt, and really not doing anything special, but just kind of mastering the play really tight until there's 3 people left, and then play really aggressive after that. And in those days, if you, did that, you could make money. So kind of did that and learned and liked the game. And once all my money was gone, and as I was getting into music and other things, I kind of stopped playing poker. And then what made me really get into it again was frankly being able to play of legal age and having, a friend who played a lot more poker than me, kind of in the more like 15, 16, 17 years where, most of his friends were poker players, and that's what they did together. And then I was, turning 21. So I started studying. First time I went to the casino on my 21st birthday, I turned $100 into $500. And that run good is a big reason why I probably decided to, do more. And that led to that summer, throughout that semester, I was playing a lot of poker, studying a lot of poker with Jack, like most nights. We'd study and hang out for hours, and, loved, the playing aspect of it, and the performance and the improvisation and the being present at the table, as much as I did the going deep on the game theory and the hand analysis with Jack. As he mentioned, the podcast was a vehicle for us to have accountability, not just for studying, but also to like have good conversations. And, we've now done 2 podcasts together. I've done a couple other podcasts, and I always, to me, podcasts have basically been an excuse to talk to people you want to talk to about things you want to talk to about. That would be like just like a little too weird to get that intensely into socially, but it's not weird when it's a podcast. So, here we are. So we did that podcast, and during college and a little bit after, it was something, playing cash games was something I did for fun and to, make money. But I was lucky to know, I think from the beginning, that doing it kind of full time in terms of playing was just, not for me. And I think a really tough life relative to other things. But the, lessons I've learned from poker have been invaluable. And now, I play for fun with friends, and it is so much fun. It's a great opportunity for hanging out. And, the way my game is structured here, it's definitely also good for kind of like networking. So it serves like all these great purposes. I just got some custom chips with a bunch of inside jokes and weird denominations that we can get into later. And I highly, highly recommend that for anyone. You need to get your own custom chips. You need to get your own custom denominations based on characters in the game. That's kind of my poker background. And now I definitely, may study here or there in the future if, I start to ever play like real big cash or, want to do some tournaments or something. But I think, now just kind of playing poker for fun is, kind of how I'm going to be relating to poker for the rest of my life. Although for me, playing my best is part of the fun. So definitely not trying to give my money away.
We talk about that all the time when we're playing for fun, but it's more fun to win, it turns out. So Jack, I mean, I know you do some coaching and you got some Solve for Why stuff that you've done in the past, which we've loved, the Poker Out Loud stuff that we've seen. But let's talk a little bit about your background. How did you get into the game? You got John Somsky's audio thing going on there?
Yeah, sorry. There's a 50-50.
We had John giving you sort of a preview of how we do things here. So you learned well. That was good.
I'm an expert already. It feels good.
It's all good.
So yeah, I don't want to repeat too much what Zach said because I could repeat quite a bit of what he said. I think some personal highlights that maybe are a little bit different. Yeah, as Zach alluded to, I played in a really competitive high school home game that has generated a handful of professionals. Could have generated more, but a lot of people, that's just not like the right path for them.
Go Mets.
Yeah. Frequent podcast guest and Just Dance coach John Metz was in that game. And
Little Mets just got a big turning score. Don't forget about
this is my turn, Zach. This is my turn.
Okay.
Yeah.
Joe, would you like me to mute him, Jack?
I think that'd be appropriate. So we had sort of an interesting like coming up experience that I like to share because I think it was actually really helpful, which is that the three of us, so my friend John Metz and his brother Thomas, we actually would play on the same full tilt account. And so we were a team. We would get together. It was just easier logistically. There were only so many laptops between us, and we would talk through decisions together. And we weren't very good. We were okay. We were probably about break even, but we learned a lot just kind of like going through like a lot of lessons in like, I'm in a tournament, nothing's happened for like 4 rounds. It's like, I got to make something happen. And then we all kind of collectively realized like, God, that was a terrible idea. Just trying to force the action right there. And so I think that kind of helped bring accountability to what we were doing. And I think helped us all improve. And also that was sort of balanced by having like a pretty thriving home game that like, every Friday, Saturday, many times like before cross-country practice, there was just like home game action happening. And just the competitive juices flowing every day, wanting to get the best of your friends. It was a big incentive to study and just kind of try and consume whatever resources were out there. And ultimately, I think we really kind of dove in to online after we were able to really reliably get money onto the site. But there was a lot of free rolls, a lot of like, caching free rolls and then trying to see what we could make happen with like a $1 bankroll. Our bankroll management was not quite there. We never really got anywhere with that. But I think I had my sort of breakthrough on sites like Carbon Poker and that kind of thing, once Full Tilt was sort of out of the picture. And actually, being able to get money onto those sites and sort of learning some bankroll management discipline, started to be able to actually make some real money. And so I've always thought of poker as sort of, I initially wanted to be a musician, which I had heard would be, challenging from an income standpoint. And so I figured that poker would be a good thing to do to sort of subsidize that kind of life. And so what I've said, like a lot of the past few years, up until really, I guess like the last year or so, I was a part-time full income poker player because I had other professions, but I wasn't really making enough money doing those. I had to really lean on a part-time poker schedule to pay the bills. Luckily, I was able to supplement that with some coaching. You mentioned Solve for Why. Zach and I both started doing coaching through Just Hands. Before that, unfortunately, Zach didn't really get to be a part of the Solve for Why thing. He sort of had to leave Just Hands right around that time. But I really loved being a part of Solve for Why, working with Matt Berkey, Christian, and those guys for a number of years. I learned a lot from them. I learned a lot making the content we did. Unfortunately, I had to step away from that. What Zach and I are working on at the fund now is just too time intensive. And so I've really had to like wind things back from a poker standpoint, which has been kind of sad, but I've just been really, really serious about the game actually for like the last 15 years, and I'm 25. So that's a pretty big chunk of my life. So I'm actually, I think, ready for just being a wreck again. And it feels good, I have to say.
Well, and seasons of life, right? I mean, you might get back into it. Who knows what the future holds? But you kind of make the decision that's in front of you to make, and whatever's giving you the most life, man, go after that thing and chase that.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious, like, it's a very obvious question for you two, especially, but I'd love to hear how you put it into words. I guess the importance of having, at least for you guys, the importance of having each other or this group of friends to not only learn the game but to enjoy the game. Because I think one of the things that we run into are people that are sort of lone rangers, isolated, and they end up being attracted to what we're doing because there's a community sense, because they've either never been able to make friends or they've been too standoffish or whatever it might be. And I'm really curious to your guys' perspective on, the improvement of your game because of having this tight-knit group, and or the enjoyment of playing the game for either one of you guys.
Yeah. I think for me, it's actually, it's why I don't think I would have been able to be like a full-time pro for any extended period of time, is because I fell in love with the game really from sort of a home game standpoint, and a culture of having a lot of poker experiences with really close friends. And at a certain point, I think that becomes hard to sustain, just from growing up. Like it's hard to spend as much time like with your friends when you have like a developing career, a developing personal life, more obligations. And so having that kind of get removed from the poker equation, just, it was never as fun for me to like play long hours in a casino, like without like friends around. And, poker players who play a lot of casinos, I have nothing against this class of people. I think a lot of them are really fun to talk to here and there. But I think in terms of like forging really close friendships, that set of like professionals is not like necessarily the happiest, liveliest, like most positive group of people to be around. And so it just didn't feel like a scene that I could imagine myself being a part of long term without, as the friends I had in the game sort of started to move on to other things.
How about you, Zach?
I mean, at this point now, it's like, it will take a lot for me to play not in like my own home game, or like, because it's just so much less fun. And as Jack said, it's like the value of my time now is the highest it's ever been, and the scarcity of my time is the highest it's ever been. And I see that, becoming more and more scarce and more valuable for the foreseeable future. So, pulling myself to play poker, like now it's great. I have a bunch of really good friends, people that we have a good time, and, also have this opportunity to like talk about certain, work, investing, tech stuff in a way that like I can't really do in any other social context. And that's like the space for that. And I love that so much. But, so some people are like, a lot of people in the game are big degens though. So, still going to the casinos and stuff all the time. It's like, you want to go? It's like, no, I don't want to go to the casino and, play like 2-5 for like 5 hours. And, like if, in Vegas with Jack or something, that's like a different story. But even then it's like, at that point, I'd rather kind of just, chill in the sauna or something rather than go to the poker table. So.
Yeah, and I think that's what we run into a lot with our recreational players is I only have a certain amount of time available to play poker. It's my hobby. I want it to be as fun as possible. I don't want to go play with a bunch of curmudgeons that are yelling at each other or berating me. I want to have some fun. So I think that resonates, I think, with a lot of our recreational players who are working other jobs.
Yeah, I mean, part of it for me actually, and part of why I still love doing Just Hands, is that a big part of what's fun about poker to me is being able to kind of like recap what happened and sort of get into the weeds of what everybody did, like what are the sort of interesting details of this situation. And my approach to playing live poker is I don't talk about strategy at the table, because I think I have very little to gain from doing so and potentially a lot to lose. And so, when you're in situations with friends, like you can, one, like in a home game, talk about things at the table potentially because, just a much more friendly atmosphere. It's not all about just like maximizing EV. And further, if like you're playing with people that you're really close with at a casino, then you get that sort of like in-person debrief time, which I think is like probably the most fun part of a poker session, to me at least. So that's something that, that's something I can get a lot of just from doing Just Hands, and we have a Slack group where we have supporters who can sort of shoot me hands all day, and just like having little puzzles that come in, it's like, oh, okay, this is interesting. that aspect of it, I don't think I'll ever grow tired of. It's more just like trying to play for profit, or playing for profit, and having to put in those hours is what gets you can only do so much of that, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah. Jim?
Yeah, well, you guys are both great problem solvers. Like, I think one of the things that a lot of the people on the panel here, we all think of poker as a series of puzzles that we have to solve, and, you two have done a great job with your personal coaching and with your live coaching. And I know you guys have done some of those sort of like play and learn activities, and Rec Poker has done some of that stuff in the past as well. Now we're trying to do most of our learning as well as our hanging out online. And I wonder if you guys have you noticed anything different in the way that people are trying to learn online as opposed to live, in the way that you're able to help people without being in the room with them? Because I know live play was a real strong point for the two of you in particular.
Yeah, I mean, they're just really different things, online and live. And something that I think, that we did as coaches for anyone that wasn't kind of some decent level of skill already, was highly recommend playing online just to get in the volume, and then to also have hands that they can export for us, so we can really kind of see results and see numbers. So online has a bunch of advantages for studying. Like, one, you could be in the comfort of your own home and like write little post-it notes about things. I'm really big in general in life, and this came from like studying and improving at poker and into affirmations. So, every time before I play poker, I, have things written down. Sometimes I had recordings of myself talking about like what to do. And I always recommended people did that. It's a lot easier to do that in your own home online than it is to in the context of a casino, especially if you're going with friends. So I think online, it's actually in many ways much easier to study and improve from. You could also just put in significantly more volume. A lot of the online pros always said it's like, I'm only 21, but I've put in, 100 times as many hands as Doyle Brunson, and which was true. And so online, I think, has a lot of advantages for improving. And, purely from the standpoint of learning to grow, I still will always recommend, online. The problem with online is that, most people that came to me for coaching, I think the vast majority of people find online a hell of a lot less fun than playing in person. Right. So that you can only sustain that for so long. And that's why I would usually find it's more like, hey, play for half an hour to an hour before going to bed a few nights a week, as opposed to really putting in sessions. And, what we liked about the live is just, the translation between what happened and, what you hear from your friend, it's always a little bit different, to say the least. So the nice thing about doing the live coaching was not only could I see them play live, but I could get my reads on the other players and see, and if they say like, oh, well, I thought he would, I was like, you have no reason to think he did that. So now, like, I can be sure that you have one of the more common leaks, which is basically, using, everyone does this to some degree in life, and poker is a great filter to be aware of it, but, wanting to do something due to your emotions and then justifying it after the fact with, logic and, reason. That's like something that everyone does to some degree, and poker is a great mechanism for being aware of that tendency. And hopefully being aware of it at the poker table will also make you aware of it, when you're, mad at someone for doing something, and then, the way the events happen keep changing and changing to make it easier to be mad at that person, as opposed to, maybe taking responsibility for things, as an example.
One thing that's been fascinating to me is just seeing these live games transition to online.
Like our game.
Like your game. I played in Zach's game for a few weeks, and it was a really good game, but it started at like 11 p.m. Eastern. And so I find myself like up from like 11 to like 4:30 or 5 every night. I was like, I just have to, I'm done. I quit.
So a little background for this game. So, everyone in my group for the most part has like a healthy amount of degeneracy in them. That's definitely a requirement for our game. We're an action game, and if you're not an action player, nothing against you. We're just not the game for you, and you're not meant for our game. So when COVID happened, a lot of people are not just playing poker a lot, whether in other home games or casinos, they're also being very social. And, it's a lot of people kind of in 20s and 30s. And, so COVID hits and I'm like, let's try a Zoom online thing. And then the first 2 weeks of like when the COVID lockdown really started, 24/7 this game is going. You have guys in New York signing on at like 6, 7 a.m. their time, and the game's still going here from California. And it's actually like almost like a continuous game that didn't stop. And it was a lot of fun. I played a lot that first 4 or 5 weeks. It's cooled down a lot now. Now people playing online 2 or 3 times a week. We've actually started up the live game again here. But yeah, absolute kind of madness. I'm not sure what your things look like, but it was such an interesting phenomenon of like everyone was just kind of like doing their poker thing and having the same social hangs and check-ins over Zoom, like every day for hours with the same people. And I think it was actually really helpful and, therapeutic for a lot of us, going from kind of no social interaction to at least something.
Yeah, just to jump on that for a second, like we used to have 2 home games every month, and they got a pretty good crowd, and we had a lot of fun with those. And then in February or March, when the pandemic hit, we decided to have one every night instead, just for a week to see how popular it would be. We've had one every night since then, and we consistently get 50 to 70 runners. It's the toughest play money regular home game in the world, I think. Honestly, I've got a couple killers in there, but we're playing for these rec poker pins. We have so much fun with it, but it's a play money game. So I know Chris is going to walk you down a hand, because I know that's really all you're here for. Just hands.
Just
fine.
hands.
I know these guys, but a couple quick things, just because most of our listeners are recreational players that are kind of caught between worlds right now. So any general rules for people that are used to playing live and now they're playing online, and just to keep you on your toes, any general rules for players that are used to playing tournaments and now they're playing more cash, or vice versa, in this sort of matrix of poker? Is there anything that we should be thinking about?
Yeah, I think there's a few things to think about. So you have to remember that you're playing against humans and understand sort of the human element that makes online and live different in the first place. And I think the main thing is that like there is a sort of inhibition that comes from just having to look at your opponent straight in the eyes. And that inhibition can kind of go by the wayside, when you transition to online. It's going to be a different effect for everybody. But I think it would be a mistake to assume that your opponents are going to be playing the same way they were playing live online. If you're like, so let's say if you're taking like the same player pool that you were already playing with before, now you've thrown them into an online format, which I know has been really common for people. Now, if you're just trying to play like online generally, then I would say that the nature of the game is just very different in this sense. Online poker is about, it's about creating a small edge over a very large volume, whereas live is about creating as big an edge as possible over very small volume. And the root of that difference is differences in ability to collect information. That's really the main difference. Volume is part of it, but the ability for you to collect information on your opponents and for your opponents to collect information on you, it's just a real game changer. And so I would say tracked. Then you now have to consider like, what kind of volume do I have with this particular player? Is it possible that they have been able to pick up on something that I've done? And so you have to have that sort of second layer of, what do I look like to everyone at the table who is able to track me in this very specific way that I'm not used to? So I think it's going to trip people up, but it's manageable. I would say start small with stakes if you're going into, big player pools.
Good stuff. Yeah, Chris, you want to get into a hand?
Yeah. I mean, I know I want people to go listen to Just Hands if you want the full taste of this, but I wanted to get just a quick taste for our audience, a little bit of kind of how you think and how you talk about hands on Just Hands. So I'm going to pick one spot from a hand, but I'll walk you to how we got there. So we have a monthly Tournament of Champions home game, so people who play in this nightly thing, anyone who wins that gets into a Tournament of Champions, and there's a monthly tournament, and that happens, and we record the table and we talk about it.
For the
And
silver
how,
pin, for the
and
very
you can win a
elusive
silver pin if you win
Yes,
it.
right.
So it's much better than the bronze pin.
Yes.
But this came up in that tournament, and I think it illustrates a really interesting spot that a lot of players can find themselves in. So I'll just kind of walk you through, and I want to get to the river spot, which I think is where we're going to be in the small blind. There's 3 players left in this tournament, and we and the button. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, just so
Yeah.
to get the questions out of the way now before we're listening to the hand history.
Yeah, sure.
Because with tournaments, there's just like a lot of considerations that you kind of have to have off the bat before you can really even get into the hand.
Yeah.
So the prize pool is just 1 pin to first.
Yes.
Okay. So does anyone care about getting in second?
Well, and so actually, I do
one
want
no.
to. So probably no, but I do want to talk about this also as if it did matter. So as if it, because like I think that this is going to be also the question that's going to come up is going to be one of these spots that's going to be, I think, pretty universal, even though this is really in a tournament where only winning matters, in this particular case. But I think that this spot is one that I think as a player you can find yourself in a lot.
Okay.
But
I will argue, Chris, there's a little bit of ICM implications for second place, because first place gets the podcast shout out and the silver pin. Second place on the write-ups, John does do the write-ups, and he says, Jim Reed bested Chris Jones, heads up.
That sounds
so there's a little bit of a mention there for second place. So I've thought about that when I was in the top 3. I thought a little bit of, there's a little bit of ICM implication there.
It's very small.
It's very small.
Do you see the hands? Or do you have information about what people had?
I have information about what hero has. I do not have information about what villain has.
Okay, I just meant in general, that you guys have sort of omnipotence about the game? Because if you did, then people would play much better.
No.
So that's something that's a
we
consideration.
We do commentary on the final table of the TOC. So we actually record the final table of Tournament Champions, and then we'll have a panel where we do commentary on it, but we only see whatever cards were revealed, or if one of the players is actually engaged in that conversation with us and telling us what they had.
Okay, cool. All right. Thanks, Chris.
So we've got 3 players left. The button and we are, as the hero, are in small blind. Both have about 45 big blinds remaining. And the big blind, which we could argue whether this matters or not with, the winner take all nature of this, only has 15 big blinds. So there's a short stack and then 2 pretty healthy stacks kind of fighting it out for first place here. And we're sitting in the small blind with ace of diamonds, 9 of clubs. And the button opens to a min open. And we elect, now we could talk about this whole hand, but you would on just hands, but maybe we'll kind of accelerate into the river. We elect to 3-bet. We elect to go 3x their bet. So we put in about 6.5 big blinds over a 2 big blind open. And the big blind folds and the button calls us. And the flop comes, again, we had ace of diamonds, 9 of clubs. And the flop comes queen of spades, 10 of spades, 9 of spades. And we could also talk about, monochrome flops and all that kind of stuff. But in this particular spot, we elect, having flop bottom pair without any kind of other kind of draw, we elect as hero to lead out for about 40% pot. And the button calls us. And the turn is a very interesting one. It's the 9 of diamonds. So now we've got a board that reads queen of spades, 10 of spades, 9 of spades, 9 of diamonds. And we again elect to lead out with our hand for about a third pot this time, and the button calls us. And the river is the brickiest of bricks. It's the 2 of hearts. And this is the spot where I really, we've had a lot of argument and talk about, okay, so what is villain's sort of flatting range in this situation? They've called a 3-bet. They've called us down this whole way. It feels like there's a lot of high spades, potentially hoping to hit their 4th spade. There's a lot of queen X maybe holdings that are hanging on with top pair. And it feels like this spot, and this is the spot where I'd really love your help in sort of, and it may be some, some monsters, there's probably some, some full houses and nut flushes potentially in range here. But what I am really struggling, and what we're struggling to talk about is, we feel like we've got a value hand here, but what's the best way to get value when we're out of position in this kind of spot? Is it that we should be leading and targeting things like the queen X's, or do we want to check and target things like the ace X of spade, or ace of spades X, and try to get them to bluff at us? And, and how do we extract the most kind of value, and how do we even think about this spot? We could talk about the earlier parts of the hand. I think there's potentially some mistakes made there, but I'm really curious about how you think about river spots like this and how you evaluate them.
Yeah, so one kind of question to get things started is, we're talking about whether to target, as a value bet, or effectively whether to turn every single one of our best value hands into a bluff catcher if this person's bluffing too much, because that's really the implication of that question. It's not so much about if this hand is in a heads up game, this is like a top of range hand. So if you're not betting this, you're not going to bet anything. Because you'd be exploiting the person from, calling too much and then bluffing too much. But to understand what to, Jack looks like he disagrees.
I don't know if I don't think I really agree, but
well, he's the fucking poker star guy. I don't know what I'm doing these days, but to begin to answer the question and talk about it, what do we know about this player? Because, what I would say, knowing absolutely nothing and kind of assuming kind of the standard, leaks that, kind of recreational players that are playing for fun in a home game with friends make, I would say that this is definitely like a bet. But, I would like to know more about the player profile, as that's really important.
Mm-hmm. Should I answer that, or Jack, did you want to jump in there too?
No, I mean, I think it's a good question. I think we're still in information gathering, in the information gathering phase of trying to help you arrive at the right decision.
Okay. Well, and please, panel, jump in here if you have thoughts about these players, because some people might know them a little bit better. But I think both of these players are both us as hero and villain are both on the more aggressive side. Can definitely be capable of showing up here. Both of them can be capable of showing up here without value. Could be showing, they're the types of players that would take their single spades. I think they could show up here with strong value as well.
So to clarify, Chris, because that, I think this is a common way that people talk about the game, which they could have this. That doesn't really help us at all.
Sure.
It I guess a little bit more than a baseline that they're terrible and they couldn't show up with those types of hands. But the types of things that, when say I was coaching, I would advise my students to look for is not so much they're too loose, but to look, it's they call too much on the flop with weak draws, or they call too much on the flop with weak, single pair type hands. Are there any more kind of actionable things in terms of, I'm sure probably a lot of people on the show, the panel, and probably some listeners are familiar with Ed Miller's book. I forgot what the name of the book is, but the 1% or something. I remember reading that with Jack in college. I was like, damn, this is good stuff. So, at any point there's kind of there's an optimal amount of hands to include in a range. And when you go, what the mistake most people make is including too many hands in that range. You're going to have too many bad hands, and the too many bad hands are are gonna have to like get cut off somewhere. And I think for a lot of people, what happens is they get cut off on the turn of the river facing a big bet. But for some players, you know, they're relatively good about that stuff, but have other leaks and other, you know, kind of deviations. And some people just stay with the too many hands throughout the whole way. So maybe with that framing, is there any information in terms of, you know, how they might play some of these earlier streets?
I am going to ask the panel, because some of these people might know this player a little bit better than even me, because I am not. I'm struggling to come up with how I would describe our
Who
villain.
was it, Chris? Call him out.
No.
Or type it in the chat. Type it in the chat.
Oh, okay. All right.
I can't remember who it was. You're talking about the villain here, right? In this situation.
Yeah.
Can
It
you
was
guys remind
three-handed
me-
in the final table, so we know it wasn't Steve.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
What was
Not this
the
time.
what was the SPR on the end there?
So they have about a pot. There's a pot-sized bet left for everyone. There's basically a pot-sized bet left.
I want to, while we're figuring out who this person is, I don't think I need to
Mm-hmm.
know much about this player to rule out check call personally. Here's the problem I have with check call. The main bluff is probably going to contain the ace of spades, and that's a hand that can really bluff you on any street. So by the time we get to the river, we're considering like how often is this hand going to bluff versus having decided to raise you in some prior street. I just don't think we're necessarily dealing with that many combos, especially in a 3-bet pot where you would think like, you know, the ace sixes through ace eights of the world might not decide to call the 3-bet. Now, if those hands are very often calling 3-bet, your check call starts to look a little bit better. But the thing is, yeah, a lot of hands are just going to have showdown here, like ace 10, ace queen, you know, king queen, king 10, queen jack, jack 10. A lot of these that have blockers that they're plausible bluffs. They just, I think, with the sort of tournament scenario that we're in, where they're in pretty good situation if they check back and lose, or check back and, you know, try and realize their showdown value. And if they're wrong and you call out, I just don't expect a lot of, your opponent has too much showdown value for me to want to turn this hand into a bluff catcher. So I would be deciding between basically shove, bet smaller, but that's a little bit tricky, or check fold. Probably leaning towards shove or check fold. And I think check fold is fine, actually. Because I do think your opponent has quite a bit of incentive to slow play here. Mm-hmm. And so I'm, you know, like 2-pair and sets don't raise the flop that much in position. They definitely don't raise the turn, you know, with a boat. Nut flushes, I don't think raise. And other flushes can raise for protection, but I don't think they need to. I think when you're in position, it's pretty easy to, you know, just click call. So I'm feeling pretty good about check fold, to be honest. But I tend to I've just become such a nit over time. Where
how old are you now?
I think I already said it once.
You're getting married. You're getting married, so now you have to start folding more. I think that's kind of how that works.
I think you can. I think you can also shove is pretty reasonable as well. I think check fold. The nice thing about check fold is you will never ever be out of the tournament at the end of this hand. Mm-hmm. And that's really a pretty solid reason to take a line when there's not a clear like slam dunk EV difference between the two actions. If you're positive that every single time your opponent has queen X, they're going to call you, I still don't even know if that really gets you there, because like, you know, it's not that much queen X, like is queen 7 suited going to play this way. So you're talking like queen jacks, king queens, you know, queen 10s and ace queens. There's a good amount of those, but there's quite a few full houses. There's quite a few flushes. And so you're making money shoving there, but you have to be really certain
You're kind of breaking up there, Jack. Sorry. I would say the one thing that I know about this player, we've done the deep research and kind of figured it out. The one thing I would add about this player that maybe would give you guys insight. Tell me how important this is. But he is the kind of player that really does like to drive action. He likes to be the aggressor. And so the fact that he just called all the way down makes me more nervous than it would against other players. Like I think if he has an ace spades hand, I think he's probably shoving flop. Or being aggressive at some point. I think even if he has a queen, he's probably being aggressive at some point. So I also think he's the kind of player that will turn a misdraw into a shove on the river. But I think when you talk about how did we get to the river in that pattern, with an aggressive player like this, I feel like it's more value-y.
I think we had to go for value on the river there, based on the actions that happened. Like Steve said, this guy would have done something more with a big hand. Keep in mind that he opened and then called a 3-bet. So his range is not going to be probably queen 7 suited.
Well, actually, Rob, what I was saying is I think if he had like a queen or if he had like the ace of spades, I think he would have been aggressive.
That's what I'm saying.
I think he's got a monster hand. I think more of my fear is that he's got a monster because he just called.
I'm thinking he had a pair, like a pair of kings, a pair of jacks, or something like that. To me, that's what it smelled like, because he did end up making the call on the river right after we went for value. So, and he lost to 3 nines.
Yeah.
So I think the queen scared him, so maybe he had jacks or tens or something like that, and just called it down.
Yeah,
thinking that he had showdown value.
So this is why it's also important to know the player, because I wouldn't, like, you can call a player aggressive in a certain way, but a player that's not 4-betting jacks or kings in terms of pre-flop, they're incredibly passive. So this is I feel like I don't know my GTO very well these days, but from my understanding, and I would defer to Jack in general on this. From my understanding, I think the default thing to do here would be going for value. The 3-bet size was pretty big for the situation. It was 3.5x, but you have a button open, of which even if this player is pretty passive, they're probably opening like at least 75% of hands. So then, in terms of the total amount of hands you can have after they call, you're looking at least 15%, if not closer to like 20, 30%. And that's just a lot of hands. So if this player is on, I think against like a range that plays against a 40 and 30% pot bets, relatively small bets, you're going to just be beating that calling range there, assuming they're going to be, calling with a reasonable, or not even necessarily high, but reasonable frequency of kind of one pair hands. But just, for the listeners, I think this is why it's important to, like saying the guy's aggressive or it's loose, it really, not only does it not really tell you anything, it could also, I think, kind of trick you into making bad decisions, because there's very few players that are just too aggressive on every street. Most players are like, I'm too aggressive pre-flop, but they're never, bluffing river. Some players, if they're check 2 on the river, they just can't help themselves. Like, really keeping track of this information is what leads to like the best type of, kind of exploitative play.
Yeah, I think it's also good to like keep the motivation of that aggression in mind. Like, is this aggression because this player has a really bluff heavy image and, they bluff a lot. And so when they have it, they just tend to like really fast play it because they're just incentivized to do so because they're just perceived to be so bluffy? Or is it, not that it has to be one or the other, but for a lot of players, it's maybe more like, I'm scared that my opponent will draw out on me, and therefore I want to just get money in as soon as possible. And I think those 2 players maybe are both approaching this flop somewhat aggressively with like the sort of strong 1-pair hands, but maybe are approaching it differently with like flushes or sets or straights, these sorts of hands. Regardless, I think shove and check call are both like pretty defensible. And yeah, I would just, depending on how loose your opponent is and how likely you are to be perceived to be bluffing, the more I would lean towards shove.
Yeah, I think Dan could be categorized as very aggressive and not necessarily always has the goods. So he's a little more bluffy than a lot of the players that we play against. I think, and he's very aggressive. So I think that's probably why he got the call on the river with the hand that he had, because he did bet. And I think I can't remember what it was. Was it like a third or something?
Yeah,
like
he
that?
did. He did not. He
Yeah.
chose to not bet. He did not shove. He bet
Right.
a third of the pot
Right.
and
right.
got called.
It got called.
And then showed his trip nines, and then the other player folded, so we don't know what he had. But
Which we talked about that, right? Like I wonder what
Yeah.
his intention was if he got shoved over the top. Is that a fold? I mean, what does he do when and if the other player shoves?
Right.
And some
I don't- I'll just say real quick.
Yeah.
I'll be real quick, Zach. I don't mind the small bet. I actually think the small bet is, particularly when there's like an actual prize pool. Sorry.
No, that's fair.
And there's a big price jump from 3 to 2. Then I actually think the small bet becomes like a pretty good tool to have in your arsenal.
Sorry, Jack, you're cutting out. We'll let Zach jump in there.
Yeah, what I would say, and you might want to mute him just in terms of the audio.
Yeah, the leg there. Yeah, got it.
Here,
I'm trying.
I think
He's unmutable.
So
Is everybody muted? What's going on now?
What you might want to consider, just in terms of the earlier street stuff, just like some quick bullets, is be really thoughtful about your sizing. I'm a cash player, but this matters like 20x more in tournaments, where like the range that you can open for 3.5x the raise size versus say like 2.3, 2.4, 2.5, which I imagine is kind of the more like correct sizing to do there, is vast. But just know why you're doing it. Think like, if this is the type of guy who's really loose pre-flop, then be exploitive until he adapts, and take your value hands and make it that 3.5x, and take your more your 3-bet bluffs and make that more like kind of the 2.2x's. And then think about sizing where it's like on the flop 40% pot. I think that's fine. I would be basically just like check folding this hand when you're 3-betting. Your range is you have much better bluff candidates than ace 9 with bottom pair. So I think this should definitely be in the check fold category. And then when you get to the turn, I don't really see the 30% pot bet, especially think about what happened on the river, which is you got your best card and you didn't get max, you didn't get stacks in, and maybe you were planning to and got scared on the river. But I think when you have what on the turn becomes kind of like definitely a top line value hand, you want to be betting more, especially given the SPR. So I probably would have gone for more like 50 to 70% pot in that spot,
and not be so worried about leaving the pot size bet behind, because you hear some of the folks talking about that. You don't want to leave yourself with less than a 1 SPR, but you're saying, well, I'm trying to get the value, and I'm going to get the value on the turn.
Well, I would be very distrustful of anyone that says you always want to have at least 1 SPR. Poker is a game where it always depends. I think that's probably good, like advice for someone like just getting started out. But what Jack and I love to do, as anyone that's listened to our podcast knows, is really get into the why for each thing. And that's what's fun about poker for us, not like learning the rules and tricks to get better, more so understanding the game at like a deep level, and making sure every decision we make have a reason why, even if it we learn later it wasn't the best reason.
Well, I think one of the things that, we keep learning as we go, and a lot of us are fairly new to the game, some have been playing for a long time, is that there's always this conflicting information. That's the part that's so fascinating about poker, is like, well, this piece of information makes me want to bet more, bet this, and this piece of information makes me want to check, and this piece of information wants me, there's all of this conflicting information. And so I think that's where it's so helpful to talk with other people. We talk about being in community and talking about it and learning the game together. And if you guys, man, this Just Hands podcast, these guys are geniuses, and I think it, provides more and more insight. So as we always tell people, don't just listen to us. We're all figuring things out. We've got some insight. We can bring some guests on, but go check these guys out as well. So I want to start to wrap us up. Obviously, we could chat for hours and hours and pick your brains, but I wanted to give Zach an opportunity. Quick, you mentioned this custom chips thing.
Oh yeah,
I'm kind of like, what is that? And then we'll just give you guys a chance to share how people can connect with you, and then we'll wrap it up.
Let me go grab them, Jack. If you want to, tell listeners about the other podcast we do right now, briefly, and where to find us there, it'd be great.
Yeah. So, Zach and I, our new, endeavor, which is, really on a much bigger scale than what we ever did at Just Hands, is a fund called Unbounded Capital. And we, it's for accredited investors, which rules out a lot of people. And I don't want to make any sort of, big pitch on a poker show. I just don't think it's the time or place. But what I will say is that, we have a podcast called Unbounded Conversations where, we've talked with a lot of really interesting people.
Jack, why don't you, if you can hear me, why don't you try to cut your video, and maybe that'll help the audio a little bit. It's pretty choppy.
And if you want to learn, just sort of get your feet wet, in terms of, sure. At this point, I'll just, I'll turn it over to Zach to, Zach, I failed to maintain a good enough connection to give us a proper pitch. So
he primed the pump. He had us listening like,
anyway.
Okay, I'm trying to fill in every other syllable. We almost got there, but yeah, help get us there, Zachary.
Yeah, so we have another podcast called Unbounded Conversations, which is related to our fund, Unbounded Capital, of which we have our own poker chip, our fund is investing into kind of the blockchain and crypto ecosystem, specifically the Bitcoin SV ecosystem. And on there, we don't just talk about Bitcoin and crypto. We also kind of talk about the intersection of that and economics. But a lot of it is kind of in the weeds of what we're seeing, who we're investing in, what we're thinking about, but then also, taking in people with very little kind of, knowledge of Bitcoin or aren't really in our industry and kind of talking about the overlap and things. And, with the title Unbounded, we kind of let the conversation flow to however it goes without necessarily a set agenda, kind of in the spirit of Just Hands, where we take one hand, but, we'd happy to spend 45 minutes on that pre-flop decision. So, you could, and then I'd say the best way to reach, Jack and I is on Twitter, and maybe you could add this in the show notes. I am Trumpet is Awesome without an E, because that's the maximum amount the username can be. And Jack is, you can tell us, Jack, I forget. Well,
we'll pick that one.
Laskey.
Okay, Jackson Laskey. So time for me to share the chips and really, for those of you that are in a position to kind of invest in this, shout out to Lee Jones, who has kind of pushed me to make these chips and, as a friend and connected to the game. The Las Vegas Gamblers General Store, highly recommend. They were great to deal with. They did both of our sets of chips and they've been fantastic. So I'm missing a couple of the chips here. They're at the guy whose house hosts the game these days. But I have a $1 chip that's John Coltrane, and I love jazz. We got a $5 Miles Davis. We got a $25 Louis Armstrong. I think you better focus. The lighting is not great. And now it starts to get fun. Really fun. So who can recognize this guy here?
Oh, he's from Rounders, right? Is that the
John Malkovich or Teddy KGB?
There it is, yeah.
Teddy KGB is on the 100. And before we get to the 1,000, there's one chip that also couldn't make it here, which is quite unfortunate, as it is our most fun chip. And it is a $230 chip. I believe the first $230 chip in the world, because one of the regular players in our game, of which I won't say his name as I did not ask permission ahead of time, would frequently bet 2 blacks, a green, and a red and call it a Mexican flag. And started to say, hey, I'm betting a flag. So instead of just having him suffer through putting all these 4 chips together, and he's a little colorblind, so that's kind of where the flag origination come from. We gave him his own flags. So there's $230 chips in play now, and the rule, we've only had him for a few games, but the rule is only Jeff can bring flags into play. No one else can start with their own flags. They have to win them off Jeff. And then this is a fun one for kind of anyone in like crypto, or I guess it's really more fun for us, probably not as fun for other crypto folks. But on the $1,000 chip is a guy named Craig Wright, who Jack and I have high conviction is Satoshi Nakamoto, or the creator of Bitcoin, of which most people don't think that he did that. And most people actually have very strong opinions kind of against him in kind of many ways. And, the fact that this is on kind of our highest denomination chip gets for some kind of fun, I imagine in the future, some fun conversations. So far in the few games we've played, it's just been all regulars that already know my shtick. But it'd be fun in the future to see that. But yeah, just the conversations that it has started, the fun of the Mexican flags makes me want to do other kind of custom denomination chips. I highly recommend if like someone in the game has like a favorite bet, like make a chip for him. It'll make it a little more complicated, but it'll be so much fun.
I love it. Super fun. Like that's the kind of stuff we're talking about when you're playing home games and you're doing this stuff. You're not going to get that kind of fun at the casino. The old $230 chip doesn't exist in a lot of the casinos that I know of. Yeah, super fun.
So flag, I raise you 2 flags.
Right, exactly, a flag. Now you can introduce other flags of other nations, and that gets really complicated. But I love it.
You guys are mostly playing 1 Davis, 2 Davis.
Nice. I love that. That's so funny. Yeah. Well, let's wrap up there, guys. I know we've taken a lot of your time, but time just flies by whenever we have interesting guests. But appreciate it so much. I think hopefully people got a flavor of who you are, your background, but also how you do things when you're breaking down hands. I think it's so good for all of us to recognize there's so many ways to think about it, and there's so many considerations. And you guys brought up considerations that we either hadn't thought of or, we didn't include. We'd like, oh yeah, we should be thinking about that more. So great stuff there. So you mentioned the Twitter stuff. We'll put that in the show notes. How else should people connect with you, whether it's about poker and coaching or Bitcoin or the fund? What's the best way?
So I think both of our DMs are open on Twitter. In terms of, where to access our content and learn about stuff, of course, justhandspoker.com. And I'll send you these links, unboundedcapital.com. And then, we have a YouTube channel for Unbounded Conversations, but you could also find that podcast on, because we do some of them video podcasts as well. So on YouTube, but it's also on like Spotify and Apple and all the major kind of podcast platforms. And Jack also, the many talented, him and one of our other partners wrote a book as well. So you could find that on our website.
On what? What was the book?
On kind of the state of crypto and blockchain and where we think the consensus kind of gets it wrong.
Very cool. Well, anything else, guys, that you wanted to cover that we didn't get a chance to ask you? Anything kind of final comments or encouragement or words of wisdom for Rec Poker Nation?
I would say, and Jack and I, we did kind of a bit of a long podcast on this, when I came back to Just Hands, I guess like a couple months ago. But really, poker is an incredible training ground for thinking about risk, especially if you really study the game. As much as, I love conversations like these and watching content, don't fool yourself that just listening to this passively is studying and working. What can be really satisfying about poker is to put in that deep learning work where, you're studying the hands in depth, you're, listening to maybe a Just Hands episode and pausing before we kind of say our opinion to form your own. And I think those skills for me have translated to a lot of success in other avenues. And I think especially for like finance and, investing and trading, it's very directly applicable. But I think poker, even if just played recreationally, even with just a little bit of study, can, really go a long way. So, if you like poker, don't feel bad about it. It's a great hobby, but you probably should work a little bit on it and you'll get a lot more out of it in both poker and elsewhere. Great stuff. How about you, Jack? Any last words?
It's always a pleasure to get to talk poker with Zach. So I appreciate you guys making this happen. And yeah, I love what you guys are doing. Keep it up and look forward to connecting with you guys again sometime soon.
Sounds good. Sounds like we will do that for sure. Well, Jack, Zach, thanks you guys so much. You guys can jump off there. We'll be in touch. We got some business that we'll attend to here that we won't bore you with, but part of our Rec
Thank
Poker
you.
community stuff. Thanks, guys.
Let me.
Have
I'll
a
drop
great weekend, Jackson. I know you've got a few exciting plans this weekend, so I don't know if those will be your actual last words, but congratulations and have a great weekend.
Thank you. I've heard that I have at least a 50% chance of surviving. So.
You do. Well, so Jack, I'll tell you right now, today is my 29th wedding anniversary. So I hope that it goes as well for you as it is for us. So seriously, all the best as you guys prepare and embark on that new adventure.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Of course.
And congrats, 29.
Yeah. Thank you. I know we're halfway there. All right, guys. Well, send me any information, but we'll let you guys go there. And thanks again.
Okay. Have a good
Awesome.
one.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
All right, guys. Well, what sort of feedback do we have from the crew? I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, that's one of those, top 3 podcasts after the Rec Poker podcast. And then it's Thinking Poker, and those guys are 2A and 2B. So it was a treat getting them on here. I think I really liked Jackson's point about live play really getting the biggest edge possible in the hand that you're playing right now, because you've got more information, and online play is more about maximizing the number of small edges that you get to express over a greater number of hands. That was a really good way to think about it.
Anything else
like
stand
that.
out, guys? Go ahead, Rob.
Well, I think, you brought up the thing that you want to bet so that you have a decent sized bet on the river.
Yeah.
And I've always tried to do that. I mean, I find myself in those situations where, well, if I bet half pot here, I've only got a half pot left if he calls. And so at that moment in time, I'm looking at, well, I need to get the value now on the turn. And instead of just doing the half pot and getting potential value there, I might just jam right then and there, hoping that he'll call. With a hand like 3 nines. So yeah, thinking about it in a different light, where the river's a whole another decision that you need to make, and you should be evaluating your decision on each street. Obviously, we want to think ahead to what we're going to do on the river, but we know that you can get value on the turn that you're not going to get on the river.
Yeah, and I think you were the first one to kind of introduce me to that idea, and I looked it up, and some others had that same idea, and I was like, oh, I really like this. So I find myself betting, whatever I have left, whatever's in the middle, divide that by 3, and if I bet that, then I'll have a pot size bet on the river. So I do that a lot, and I think in some cases that works well, maybe when there is a blank on the river like this. But what happens if the king of spades rolls off on that hand on the river? Now we're just check and praying the guy checks back. And we're going to fold. And so, what I mean? We're not getting our money in. We're not getting more money in when we think we have the lead. And so I don't know. Yeah, that was good. But I think that's the value of learning in community, right? The value of having all these conversations and getting new perspectives and going, oh, what about that? What about that? And I thought that was really interesting.
That was good.
Well, any other thoughts looking back on Jack and Zach?
I liked what he just said at the end too, about how poker is just this wonderful sort of proving ground to understand risk and understand it's, and we've talked about that with some other guests as well. And it's, it really is. And it makes sense that they're jumping sort of into that kind of investment sphere. I think if you understand those worlds, you can sort of jump into the other ones a little bit more easily.
I came out of that world. I came out of the capital markets hedging investment world and found some similar things in poker that were just as exciting and invigorating in decision making. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, just not only risk, but also entitlement. Like you watch your aces get cracked 20% of the time over 1,000 hands, and it actually you start to realize, hey, wait a second, maybe things don't go the way they're mapped out every single time. That's a valuable lesson.
Should happen, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. I should get in a car accident every once in a while. I should get a speeding ticket. I should get sick. I mean, if you're not, then you're running way too good. Well, good stuff, guys. Let's clip on to the end of this thing. just a few things again. We're funneling everybody. Go to rec.poker and sign up for the twerp newsletter. This is where you're going to get all the information, but just super high level. We do podcast recordings. We do monthly seminars. We do book studies. We do monthly and nightly home games on PokerStars with monthly Tournament of Champions. We do Zoom meetings while we're playing home games. We learn from our partner organizations, our learning partners. We do strat chats where we break down the latest Tournament of Champions final table. We stream on Twitch. We have groups. We have forums. We have so much stuff going on. We can't possibly tell you all about it, but I pretty much guarantee you're going to find something that you enjoy. So go in there, become a free member, play around, and see what you like, and then do more of that. So we don't expect everybody to do everything, but you will find something that you really enjoy. So that's my encouragement for anybody who's out there listening. Go get your free membership at rec.poker. Tool around. If you have any questions, reach out to us. We're always available and willing to help. Anybody have anything they want to share specifically? I don't know if we want to start with the great one. We always start with the great one. Should we just start with the great one again? All right. The greatest player in poker history. I think that's what he said people refer to him as.
No, it was the nicest guy in poker.
Oh, right. That doesn't sound right either. I'm not sure about that.
Well, okay. So that may be a lie, but it's definitely not true that I'm the greatest player in poker history. That is, take that off the table right now.
I was testing the edges.
Yeah, that's definitely wrong. I mean, I'm probably not the nicest guy in poker, but compared to Steve, of course.
Well, maybe you're closer to the top. Maybe you're closer to the top in the nicest guy rankings.
I'm much closer plausible. There. I'm much closer there than I am to greatest player. All right, so we have a few nightly poker series from August 24th to August 30th. Michael Babker got his third nightly series victory. Witchy Stuff, Leda Ligari got her fifth nightly series.
She's Canadian, so you can just butcher any Canadian's name. That's fine. I'm perfectly fine with that.
Unlike Jim, I find her to actually be kind of nice.
She is way nicer than Jim.
Yeah.
Well, we're setting the bar pretty low there, fellas.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even think Jim's an official Canadian because,
Hey,
Canadians
I told you not to bring that up on the air.
Sorry. Now then, KB, Doug Barron's got his first nightly series.
Yeah, Doug.
I was a little surprised that was his first.
Yeah, he's a regular.
He's been there at the end a lot. He used to be in my home game, then he moved to Florida to retire and live the good life. So whatever.
Kelly S. 1962-20. Kelly Stork got her first nightly series victory.
Yeah.
Overdue for Kelly Stork. Way to go, Kelly. Nicely.
I think she was runner-up to Doug the night before, I think, too.
That's what you're looking for right there. That beautiful thing right there, Kelly. Oh, God, I'm excited for you.
And Hurricane 1K, James Portugal, got his third nightly series victory. That's pretty impressive because I don't think he hasn't been playing since the beginning. He's a newer player there, and 3 already.
Yeah, he got a couple right away. Yeah.
Of course, we have to, I regret to mention that Oreo Milk 444 Owen Drabeck got an impressive 6th nightly series victory.
Oh man, the Draybecks. We have to do something about the Draybecks.
It wouldn't be a weekly
report. He does not
report.
have the most number of nightly series victories because his father has 7. So there's still some rivalry going on there somewhere.
They have optimized the way to play. Now they're not reckless players, I don't think, but they're very aggressive. But they've optimized this pin thing because last night I looked and 2 of the first 3 people out of the tournament were the Draybecks. So they figured out a way to make this happen. I don't know, but yeah, impressive. Owen, nice job. But he's back at the U, so maybe he can't play as much now.
Hopefully, for the rest of us. Nice guy, kid though. Yeah, no issues whatsoever. And then we have Keck Geek 65. Now I do not know who that is. It is a different player than Keck Geek, who is Jacob K. So I don't know. I'm assuming there's some relationship or just a big fan or something. But anyway, that was his or her first nightly series victory.
Yeah, I told them to email me to give me the information. Hey, you said maybe it's a big fan. Maybe we start doing that. Like we all rename ourselves like Oreo Milk 5555, or that could be Chris, Oreo Milk 555, or we become fans, so we change our aliases to their names.
Yeah, please don't do that. It's a big pain for me if people start changing their names.
After tonight's episode, maybe we need to create poker chips in honor of some of our more famous players.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That seemed really fun for sure.
It
Yeah.
did.
Well, anything else, John, that we need to chat about?
That's it.
All right. How about the rest of you guys? Anything else that we need to share? I won't call on you because I was calling the wrong people. So, all right. Well, if nothing else, like I said, just go to rec.poker. Seriously, a ton of stuff going on, ton of stuff coming up, all of that stuff. Sign up for the newsletter, become a free member. It literally costs you nothing, and you get access to the groups and the forums and all that really cool stuff. So do that. Thanks to our sponsors. Our official sponsor is Running Aces Racetrack, Hotel, and Casino. We are also sponsored by Website Amp and Learn Pro Poker. Thanks to Jack and Zach. Good stuff there. Thanks to Eric for jumping on here as one of our listeners. If you're a premium member, you can actually listen to the podcast and engage with us and do the chats and all that stuff. So jump on. And thanks to the panel, Jim, Chris, Rob, John. Good stuff there. And we will catch you all next week. See ya.